Hello guys, welcome back to my channel and enjoy this fanfic part 2. Now let's start the fanfic. Sweat covered her skin, glistening in the last rays of daylight as she approached the screen door to her house. Once inside, the comfort of the air conditioner made her sigh contentedly and move around to the kitchen where she could have a huge glass of water. Sufficiently watered, Sakura made her way to the living room where she laid out on the sofa and pressed to play a random movie. Her body slowly caught up with her, moving from a fast-paced heartbeat to a mellow one that threatened to put her to sleep any minute. She had gotten off work 3 hours ago after a grueling 16-hour day stuck in a squad car, looking for trouble to be stamped out with her authority as a peacekeeper. Sakura stretched out like a gymnast, bringing her fingers and toes to the furthest they could go and sagged into the cushions. A long intense 2-hour workout now tingled over her entire body as her toned muscles relaxed themselves, as Sakura looked down at her attire of a cropped sports bra and tight lycra shorts to see her flesh cooling off in the controlled environment. She never expected to have a body she was proud of when she was in high school and smirked at the chest that had grown in. Very proud indeed. Sakura's eyes turned into the television screen just as the two female characters began a catfight. You can't make him happy. Like you can. You're just using him to stroke your ego. Oh, well at least I stroke something. Not like you bitch. Ah. Sakura's eyes simmered as the catfight turned ugly, both girls lashing out with their nails and gnashing with their words and teeth at the other, trying to win the heart of the rebel who watched them from afar, surprised by their outcries of affection. She had been that rebel in middle and high school, and felt for the poor male character. Sakura herself had many girls try to goad her into getting expelled, boys trying to get in her pants to make her not a rebel but an easy score in the sack, but she'd resisted well enough. Not enough to not get a hell load of detentions, but they were good times, and Sakura remembered them fondly because they were who she was, a hot-headed smart teenager who chose for herself what she believed in and would not be bullied by others as she had been back in elementary school. Ah. Sakura melted for a second as she looked down at her hair caught in the clasp of her necklace. After entangling it, Sakura brought the necklace to her eyes and stared into the sapphire color of the gem. She'd had it on her neck for years, why she still had it on was a mystery to her. She just felt like wearing it always, even on duty, which was a major regulation issue if someone wanted to get her in trouble. Heck, blue did not even go well with her hair color being a bright pink. A sobering guilt-ridden frown formed in Sakura's lips. She was such a liar. She knew why she kept it. The necklace had been Naruto's first gift to her, the blue being his favorite color. It had been in this manner that by wearing it, that in a way, Naruto was marking her as his girlfriend. Sakura remembered fondly the memory of him giving it to her when they'd met and shared an evening together, on his roof, which she'd scaled up to the wall to surprise him. She'd done the classic turn away and show her dainty neck for him to put it on, and he'd been so nervous with the clasp that he fumbled with it for a minute while Sakura laughed. It wasn't until they began dating that he'd confessed that he wanted the other guys to see the necklace and back off his girl, earning he and her their first make-out session on that same roof. Kissing, hands roaming, an utter cry of romance met with a flare of unbridled arousal. Suddenly, Sakura looked away from the screen and pulled her body close together to hold off the feeling of utter depression that was trying to break her. Last week, she had been rejected, caught in a heated moment that she thought was the re-emergence of her romance, and left her feeling vulnerable like a baby deer unable to stand. She'd gone and opened her heart again, and this time it was cracking. It was all her fault to boot. She couldn't fault anyone because Naruto was engaged, whether Ino told her to be with him or not. It wasn't right. That girl of his was so lucky to have him, a man who would please another until they begged them to stop. His corny jokes and his infectious smile. His smile had seen better days from her brief experience with him again. He was missing a spark that had been there when she was with him. And now, she felt a pain at the thought that he hated her. She had naively assumed he'd been at the club to reconquer her, to restart what they'd had. No, just to reconnect as friends. But she'd been an idiot, and in her pity she hadn't given her number. And now he hadn't even called her with her number, which she'd been so careful to give him while her partner was busy with the other witnesses. He must hate her. He must. And to make it so much worse, she had the next 4 days off from work, stuck thinking about a man who would never be hers. Sakura groaned into a pillow, and she regretted not going with Ino tonight to the bars that were sure to be filled with easy girls and boisterous fellas. It would have been fun to set Ino up with a fine man and enjoying the matchmaking euphoria that came from a successful conquest by her blonde friend. Ino wasn't what one would call easy, but she had her quirks, and Sakura knew what she liked. Sakura rubbed at her eyes with the pillow. She'd never taken a guy home before, but to be appreciated always felt nice. She just wanted to feel loved and appreciated for the woman she was right now. A buzz of her phone on the table piqued her interest as a text screen lit up. Sakura lazily picked it up and turned on her back to read it. Maybe Ino had changed her mind and wanted to go see a movie instead. The text read, "It's Naruto." A huge blush slid up Sakura's face, up to her nose as a massive grin and teary eyes burst out. He texted me. I'm worth something to him. Sakura's thoughts swirled happily. But Sakura quickly shook out the utter giddiness and tried to control it as another bubble of text came up. A conversation perhaps. Maybe she could dare to hope to hear his voice. ... I need a friend right now. Are you available? Sakura thought of what the words could mean. Did he have a bad day at work? He wanted her to once again be his outlet for his troubles. She'd gladly be to. What? Sakura gaped as her mind caught up with her fingers, who in her gutter of a brain, had decided to write in her address and press send. Sakura bit her lip nervously. She couldn't just retract the text, could she? She didn't want to scare him away again. Are you sure? Came his reply. Of course. Sakura smiled, her eyes soft and loving at the silly question. I'll be there soon. Sakura read aloud and pulled the phone to her chest and squealed happily. Pull yourself together, Haruno. Sakura whispered after what felt like hours with her heart beating like a hummingbird. Be still, my beating heart. She recalled from Shakespeare. She could do this. She could handle this. Just friends. No romance. Naruto was coming over to seek her comfort, and she was to be his shoulder to cry on, to take in all his troubles and make them better. They could be as they were before, the best of friends with a secret untold language that only they could possibly understand. Friends were there for each other and argued and cried together. They took care of their worries and relieved them of their burdens. They listened to their woes and basked in the comfort of their close connection in the world. They just didn't kiss and tell about it. Yeah. Sakura licked her dry lips wantonly as her eyes blazed in desire. No kissing this time, Haruno. The bell suddenly rang throughout the house, causing Sakura to shoot off the couch and scrambled towards the entryway. He was here already. Sakura passed the clock on the wall and realized that she had just spent 30 minutes fantasizing and cursed to herself as she faced the door where her friend stood just beyond the 3 feet of space. Just as her hand extended, Sakura realized just how much skin she was showing on her arms. A red hue grew all over her body as she looked down and grimaced. She was in lycra shorts, pulling her hips tight, in a sports bra, swelling her chest and emphasizing her slender frame. Her luscious toned legs from her regimen of 10-mile runs a day, and her toned stomach from 300 crunches and planks and sit-ups. God, I'm not trying to seduce him here. Sakura groaned in her throat. I should change first, she whispered and turned to head to her room. Friends did not seduce another or flirt. But, what if he leaves? Sakura uttered and looked back to the doorway. If she took too long to open that door, he'd leave and go somewhere else. She didn't want that. Bringing her hand to the doorknob, she breathed out her nerves. You got this, Haruno. Just be the friend you've always been. She opened the door. Oh, Sakura thought as the door did in fact reveal Naruto, but it was his eyes that made her freeze in place. She couldn't move, her throat constricted, her muscles coiling tightly, ready to fight or flee. Why is he looking at me like that? She shivered. Naruto's eyes looked like that of a predator. She gulped back her worry and cleared her throat. Hey. This changes nothing. Wa mmmmhhh. Sakura's question died right there as Naruto jumped forward, his lips mashing straight upon hers, as his arms pushed her into the hallway, and Sakura hissed into the steamy kiss as her back slammed into the opposing wall, cracking sounds resounding in her head as her body swooned. Being his friend. This is what we did in high school anyways. Sakura's arguments died right there as her body ignited with a burning passion right then and there. Her arms wrapped around his neck as her legs tried in vain to wrap around his waist, but Naruto had pinned her against the wall, his hands hungrily skimming over the entirety of her body. Sakura's thoughts of friendship were forgotten in her mind when his tongue slipped between her lips and a breathy moan sounded dirty in her eyes. It was maybe only 30 seconds before Naruto was pawing her chest hungrily, sliding underneath the waistband of the offensive material to grip at her sensitive S, making Sakura wet as he graced repeatedly over her hardening nipples. No words were spoken as he rammed her harder into the wall and her arms slid above her, the top sliding over her face and down to the floor, forgotten as Naruto sloppily leaned back to stare at her chest. I always knew you'd grow out. They're yours. Sakura uttered quietly before Naruto bent down and gave each a few licks, making Sakura moan incessantly from the sudden pressure. It had been ages since she felt this good. But she wanted some eye candy too. With a heavy push, she reversed them, pushing Naruto into the other wall and pulled his shirt off his chest, breaking a few buttons in the process, but neither heard nor cared about that right now in the moment. All that Sakura wanted was to press her chest into his. He wasn't as scrawny as he used to be, but he wasn't all muscle either. Sakura melted as they parted their lips again, biting and kissing into the other's neck and collarbone as nails dug into backs. You have some muscle, Naruto. Naruto grinned into the crook of her neck. You used to always call me scrawny. Not scrawny bod, Sakura drawled as Naruto nipped just under her ear. It was a weak spot of hers, one only he knew about. Sakura's hips began to slide back and forth along his crotch, her heat boiling over as they pushed the other into it. You always did like some muscle on a guy. Well, you have that now. But this part of you hasn't changed a bit. Naruto growled as his hands slid underneath her shorts and tightly gripped at her, mashing the flesh between his fingers as Sakura's eyes widened in heightened arousal. Sakura lolled her head back, completely vulnerable to though on the weakest part of her body. It was the part that Naruto had loved the most after all. Sakura growled lovingly as Naruto suddenly gripped her tightly and scraped her body up against his, pulling her up to his face as she expertly wrapped her legs around his waist, grinding heavily as they began to finally move into the living room. But they were quick to turn into the next hallway to the bedrooms. It took all of Sakura's effort to suddenly grip the wall, stopping Naruto from continuing into the purple sparkled door ahead of him. Not there. Roommate. Sakura murmured against Naruto's lips. Naruto only nodded before he turned around, and at this point the need to procreate was too much as Sakura twisted her arm back to open her door. Naruto stepped through and kicked the door closed, before falling onto the bed, still entrapping the eager lady below him. Explicit. As Sakura huffed at the feeling of him meshed atop of her, Naruto began to get to work on her lycra shorts. Half of the garment was see-through and only served to tease him further as he backed down, drawing the fabric down her legs, which Sakura slid together and raised her up as he peeled it to gaze upon his UAL minx ready to play. I've thought about doing this for years. Naruto groaned as he began to kiss along her thigh, as Sakura's began to leak with her essence at the arresting sight. But his words suddenly hit within her chest, and sung with the chorus of her own thoughts welled up deep within her heart. Naruto continued to kiss up her thighs, his mind stuck in a frenzy as he gripped at her flesh, listening for the soft moans that she let out when he hit the right spots. She hadn't changed at all. He knew exactly where to make her feel amazing, and he was adamant on making her squirm under him as he finally reached her and kissed it reverently. He heard her bite down on her moan and began to lean in again when he felt a change. Her legs started quaking, and small sobs began to bubble out of her mouth into his ears. Naruto glanced up and saw a small trail of tears flow out of her eyes to her cheek. Sakura. A moment of clarity sobered him as he leaned up to kiss her lips. Is something wrong? Was she about to say no? He deserved the treatment after last week. Sorry. Sakura blubbered as a raging smile shone back at him. I've wanted this for so long too. I want you so bad, Naruto. A wide grin spread across Naruto's face as he leaned back and began to take off his belt. How bad? Without a second of hesitation, Sakura's fingers slid over her nipple and over her, working to keep herself at the limit. So bad. Naruto dropped his pants, and reached for the waistband of his boxers. How bad do you want me, Sakura? He goaded as he pulled them off, leaving his to lunge out at her desperate, lust-ridden eyes at the size that had been in her mind for 10 years. Naruto reveled as Sakura's entire body shivered, her legs widened, and her eyes shone with an unbridled love oozing out of her lips. I want you. Naru. Naru. Her pet name for him. She only spoke that name when she was happy and content and, aroused beyond belief. Naruto needed nothing more as he moved into position above her and immediately sunk halfway inside her. Oh God, God. Both of them moaned as Naruto's member pierced inside her vaginal walls, sinking deliciously inside her as Sakura's body seized the intruder and gripped it tightly with her muscles. You're so tight, Sakura. Naruto gasped, happily surprised. Just like the first time. Happy pain tears flowed out of Sakura's eyes as she pulled him further inside her, her emotions run amok at his approval. She hadn't had in so long. She may have as well been a virgin as the pleasure mixed with the pain, but it felt just like their first night and. Sakura widened her eyes as she heard Naruto breathing heavily as he lightly stroked inside of her. Naru. God. Why you're so tight, Sakura. I'm so close already. How do you do that? Naruto looked straight into her eyes, as Sakura blushed heavily as she felt his twitching eagerly. You're already. You're not. Naruto gasped as he saw Sakura grin sheepishly. Fine then. Sakura moaned loudly as Naruto began to piston faster inside her, pushing deep inside her as her muscles clamped down and pulsed. Naru. Naru. I'm coming. Me too. Naruto growled as both participants pushed out, their climaxes spewing everywhere, as both shook with intensity. 1, 2, 3 loads shot deep inside of Sakura's womb, kissing it with a force that made her a stuttering mess as Naruto closed his eyes happily at the feeling. As the waves ebbed and slowed, sweat poured out as both breathed heavily, their breaths huffing directly into the other's face. And then there was silence as two pairs of eyes connected. A phrase echoed in their minds, they could do better. Without pulling out, Naruto found himself being pushed up by the girl underneath him. With a single look at her eyes, All dominance left him as Naruto allowed this rebellious creature to push him down onto the mattress and straddled his legs, her glistening legs spreading out as she sunk even deeper onto his long shaft. Naruto and Sakura widened their eyes as Naruto finally bottomed out, but it had pierced Sakura's cervix, and Sakura couldn't stop the jitters as he pressed at her womb from below. "Oh God, Naruto, you're breaking me," Sakura sang. "Oh, don't just sit there, Saku. Move your Saku." Sakura blushed at her own pet name and smiled lovingly as she indeed moved her, gyrating her hips back and forth to spread herself better. Once she did, Naruto began to thrust up into her hot core, making Sakura moan as she began to bounce up and down, her voice incoherent as she bit her lip to silence herself. Naruto, however, was enjoying the sight too much. Every time he thrust up, Sakura moaned his name. She shivered with her limbs quaking as her legs pressed tightly against his sides, and her chest heaved and bounced with every breath she took. In Naruto's ears was the slap of hair on his skin, and Naruto smirked as he reached around to grip it tightly, taking back some control as he increased the pace, slamming his hardening member ever deeper into her as he watched in rapt attention as she unraveled before him. Gone was her poise and good girl routine, to be replaced by the love-struck, dominant woman above him, trying to urge him into another frenzy. As Sakura continued to increase her pace, their shared crescendo of arousal ever trending upwards, her breathing only pushed her chest out more and more, until finally Naruto reached up and pinched at her nipple, making Sakura cry out as he used it to pull her down to him into a passionate lip lock. It wasn't long before the steady pounding became too much for them and they each took a final breath before succumbing to their UAL whims and broke down once more, their essences spilling into the other with an even greater intensity than before. End explicit. Naruto's glazed eyes couldn't help but stare at the girl on top of his chest, breathing heavily as her arms shook against the mattress, holding her up as she rode out her second orgasm. Why was it that she looked so beautiful right now? A slick sheen of sweat covered every inch of her pores, drenching her in salt and making her weak in the knees. Naruto smiled as he nudged at her leg and she immediately impaled herself upon his as her leg broke apart. Sakura moaned loudly as Naruto turned them on their side and softly kissed at her lips, pulling out slowly, before he finally exited, and immediately both pairs of eyes grew pained, as if missing a piece of themselves after such an experience. Wow, Sakura, you really know how to welcome a guy. Shish, shut up. Sakura struggled to breathe, cuddling around his waist and intertwining their legs as she laid her head against his pec. It's only because it's you, I mean. Shish, Naruto cooed as he rubbed at her hair, pulling her into a state of contentment. A small satisfied grin graced his face. Only he could get Sakura that worked up. That set on milking him for what he was worth. He was a happy man. He remembered feeling this way in high school, the raw power he got from walking down the hallways knowing that many guys were jealous about his relationship with the school rebel. He hadn't gotten the rush after the first night together, what with her disappearing and all that, but he was determined to get this feeling for however long he could. He could take on the world right now. And all he had to do was pleasure this woman and her silly. His pleasure. Naruto hissed and looked down, as Sakura gazed down at his bending, her hands sliding along it to pump blood to where it needed to go. She was still raring to go. Damn, he had a fine woman before him. Naruto hissed though, knowing it'd be a while until he came again. But, he smiled. He had learned some nice things during their time apart with pleasuring a girl. Surely she'd appreciate that. A ghostly image made him sober up though, and as he pulled himself to top and openly lewd and uilized Sakura, he stared right at her, with determined eyes. Only until the wedding. He spoke with such authority at this goddess before him. And yet the huge smile only served to unhinge him further. A sly tongue licked at his cheek as Sakura grinned darkly as she nipped at his ear. Gone was her pride as a new woman, before him was the rebel that would do anything for what she wanted. So with her voice in his ear, she uttered, "I'll take whatever I can get." The morning only served to awaken Naruto from what had to be his best slumber than he had had in weeks. His eyes were groggy and his whole body emanated a warmth that urged him to go back to bed and bask in the warmth of last night's activities. At the memory of last night, Naruto tilted his head to his chest where a beautiful pink-haired angel lay asleep atop him. His eyes melted at the sight of Sakura's sleeping face, how small puffs of air cutely proofed out every few seconds from her mouth. And then he noticed how her smile looked as if she were a cat that ate the canary. Was she really so proud of the fact that they had after so long? Or maybe the fact that they had done it a multitude of times just last night. God. His legs felt like jelly right now, could he even walk straight? Naruto's idle hands began to rub against her skin, the blanket they'd spread over them in the early morning lay discarded on their upper thighs. He smiled. Sakura still kicked the covers off in her sleep. So cute. As he continued to casually caress his conquest, his mind began to spin and twirl over the memories of last night. That was as good as their first time together. It was still perfect. Naruto thought fondly. Neither of them were out of rhythm, and though they spoke few words, he knew that none really needed to be said. They transitioned from position to position at the same time, their bodies' signals moving in harmony. If Naruto's hand strayed, Sakura's body twisted or edged away and he'd move back into where it felt best for them. When she had tilted him back to sitting up and further to take control, he happily let her get some time dictating the pace before he would lead her back down beneath him to dominate her once more. Naruto happily smiled at her sleeping face. They were the push and pull of the ocean waves, or the tidal floods of a delta, rising and falling throughout the day. Neither completely dominated the other, forming a true symbiotic union between them. As he brushed through her hair, a few strands fell in front of her face, and when he brushed her bangs past her ear, Sakura snuggled to the side, pressing her cheek into his chest. Naru. He smiled wide at her sleepy confession. How could he forget this moment between them? Sakura was an angel when asleep, and such a rebel when awake, just like when they were teens. His eyes wandered back up to the ceiling, following his thoughts on the last 2 weeks. When she pulled him over as a cop, he'd been so sure that she'd mellowed out, but last night sure told him that she liked the more interesting things in the bedroom, and was as stubborn in life as well. She sure grew up to be such an intriguing young woman. A soft rumble echoed in Naruto's stomach and he slowly began to exchange himself with a pillow that was as long as he was. Sakura frowned in her sleep as she readjusted to the softer material, but soon Naruto was able to look down at her backside as her leg carved up and over the pillow in a vice grip. Naruto took one more chance to caress her cheek, earning a content moan in response. Maybe I'll bring her something to drink. Naruto thought with a smile. She was the rebel in high school, and while everyone went on and on about coffee, he knew that she preferred tea. Green tea with a splash of mango if he remembered correctly. Or maybe it was orange. He smiled as he found his boxers and began to slide them on. Maybe he could surprise her and wake her up with it by her bedside. A stray look from the end of the bed made him pause, from her soft shoulders to the swell of her hips, and to the erotic heavenly treasure between her legs. Ah! Naruto groaned as he looked down at the raging tent coming from his boxers. Morning would he couldn't help but be aroused around the beauty that was Sakura Haruno. Stepping into the hallway, he slowly closed the door, mumbling to himself. Come on, little guy, 4 times last night wasn't good enough for you. You're going to make Sakura think I'm some kind of freak. But his blood would surge even more down below as he turned the corner and straight into the living room and kitchen where the blinding morning sun's rays blazed back at him through the glass screen door to the yard. Hey Sakura. You usually sleep in, but I got your A feminine, sultry sound emanated from beyond the glow of the sun, and as Naruto adjusted to the brightness, his face lit up like a furnace of the sight before him. Luscious pale legs on the carpet, thighs as soft as a tenderfoot begging to be touched, a set of wide hips and an hourglass stomach. A set of perky S almost the size of his fiancée's, followed by hair slated to cover one side of her face, and the bluest of baby blue eyes. That was his first memory of Sakura's housemate, but for a silk robe and nightie to cover herself. Naruto's curious eyes hungrily gazed down at her bare, and then to her pink areolas, proudly standing out, pressing against the strain of material that for a fact covered her top half in nothing but a see-through purple fabric, and her silk robe was loosely tied at her waist, but as he watched the rope undo itself, it covered nothing and only served to accentuate her body in a violet backdrop. The girl's hands held a cup of coffee in them under her chest, and her mouth formed an O as her eyes froze at the sight of him. And then, like a spell disappearing, the O morphed into a salacious smile that promised a night of passionate lovemaking and a lifetime of flirtations. Hello, handsome. She grinned as Naruto forced himself to look up at her face. But then she extended her hand, and he looked and saw what he thought had to be the best pair of S in his life. Hi, I'm Ino, Sakura's roommate. Naruto. Ino hummed to herself, and then something in her eyes changed, as she set the coffee down and began to cover herself up with the silk robe. Naruto couldn't help that the see-through material didn't hide the fact of her skin, but it hid enough of her flesh to be less awkward. Please forgive my state of undress. Ino spoke up without even a trace of a blush. I've grown up practically around only girls, and Sakura has never brought a boy over before. It's alright, and I'm glad that you find me so attractive. A girl always likes to be reminded of that. What? Naruto questioned as Ino's eyes gazed downwards. Naruto followed and blushed even deeper at the sight of his straining heavily against the fabric, giving Sakura's roommate a very good guess as to how big he was. Ino meanwhile smiled at the sight of Naruto's flushed state, and was inwardly proud of herself in the knowing that he enjoyed the view. If she could make her roommate's high school lover aroused, then she must be doing something right, and the fact that he was so attractive and made her hot with a single stare was a plus as well. A bitter thought that she couldn't have him made her smile turn a little sad. Shame Sakura claimed you already. Ino sighed, flipping her hair out of her view of the fine specimen before her. I would definitely not mind a roll in the hay with you. Naruto smiled at the flirtation, opening out of his shell a bit. Nor I with you, Ino, but. Yeah, Ino cut in and Naruto stammered on. But, oh gosh, you are just too cute. Ino giggled as she slid forward to hug him and giggled a bit more, pushing his arms in between her chest closer to keep him flustered. I feel I know so much about you already. Sakura never stopped talking about you in school. Naruto was blushing at the intimate context of Ino's S when that information pulled him out of it. She talked about me in college. Ino smiled as she stepped back and directed him to the couch where they sat down. Actually, I've been friends and roommates with Sakura since she moved away from you junior year. We were both rebels and sent there because we were such brats, me more than Sakura. Ino saw Naruto smile at that. He definitely had a thing for rule breakers. But we were bunk mates, sharing everything from our schedules to our meals. By the end of it, we were best friends and knew everything one could think of. That sounds amazing. Naruto smiled sadly, looking down at the floor. Ino let her smile drop, realizing that her happiest times with Sakura must have been the most difficult for Naruto. You know, Ino hinted, nudging his shoulder as she did so. I was there the whole time, and it was her choice not to call you. You shouldn't blame yourself when Sakura went through that all alone. What? Naruto looked up at her confused and sat up straight to look at her. What do you mean? What? I mean, Ino began to speak before she paused. What does he mean? What do I mean? Surely they spoke last night and, Ino thought before she saw Naruto's confused face at her words. With silent realization, she silently eeped and cursed herself. Seriously, Sakura, you can have with him again and you still didn't tell him what happened. Ino mentally yelled at her roommate and best friend for life. I told Sakura to tell him the truth and then him. No more lies. Not just. Ino held in her rant and breathed in to calm herself. All of this while keeping a neutral expression. Well, you know, having to leave without saying goodbye. It hurt her too. Ino finished lamely, attacking Naruto's emotions as badly as she would have saying it to Sakura. Naruto grew somber, oblivious to Ino's inner screaming. Yeah, I wish I could have gotten her number so I could at least call her, but her parents said there were no phones allowed where she went. Ino held back a hiss as no doubt, Sakura would have yelled at her parents for their fib. The school had a landline for stuff such as family and boyfriend calls allotted to them. Of course, after a time, Sakura hadn't. Well, she would have been adamant about not contacting him after that event. Naruto just shuddered and continued his monologue, taking comfort in someone else who knew Sakura as well as he used to. It hurt so bad when I realized she was gone from my life, and if I'd heard anything, I'd have jumped on a bus to see her. I really hope that she would have known that. Ino smiled, hearing with such clarity the love Naruto had for Sakura. He would have taken care of her and their child. She bitterly remembered Sakura's worries back then and would have agreed. Naruto would have dropped out of college and high school to care for her. A sound of creaking reached her ears, telling Ino that Sakura was stretching out and awakening from her slumber. She needed to move fast and push the two lovebirds in the right direction. She still has feelings for you, you know. Naruto looked down sadly. Ino had hit him right where it hurt. She said she loved me last week. But I'm getting married in just over a month. I don't know how I'm supposed to do this. I. Naruto froze as Ino slipped closer and rubbed his leg, comforting him. I can't say anything on how Sakura grew up or how she spent her days beside you. I know the Sakura that grew up after you. Quote. Ino leaned in further, and made eye contact with Naruto. What I do know is this, Sakura's heart does not forget easily. It takes the love and romance and runs with it. It can't be changed or molded or forgotten. Even when the Ino began to say baby, but caught herself. Even when she graduated high school and came with me to college, she reminisced about you every day. She has never forgotten you, Naruto, so don't forget her. Then what am I? Go ahead. Ino grinned lewdly. God knows I love it. But don't just, alright. Naruto quirked his eyes and Ino leaned in closer. Now's your chance to end things right, to end things properly. A wave of realization came upon Naruto's eyes and Ino was proud of that look. They didn't have to have a happy ending, or part with remorse. They could slowly ebb away at the foundations, compromising along the way until all that remained was their friendship, a friendship that would end only after many more years to come. The sound of the door shutting in the hallway turned both heads as Sakura came around the corner, stretching up over her head, in what had to be Naruto's shirt over her top half, but stopping at her upper thighs, and stretching up made it hide nothing from view. Ino grinned as she watched Naruto ogle Sakura's long alabaster legs, and held herself back from trying to seduce this man. After all, most of her bedroom conquests were because of Sakura. Gorgeous Ino might be, but talking up to boys was not easy for her. She only managed to find the worst of guys who treated her like property. Sakura, however, had a good sense of a person and so knew how to pick guys well. So Ino always took her wingwoman out and Sakura always shot her in the direction of the best guys. Her bedroom activities afterwards were the best of her lists, but the friends of those boys always wanted to get with Sakura too, but she didn't put out, despite the many offers she'd been given. Yes, her legs, they were nice. Sakura opened her eyes and made her way to her lover. Morning, Naruto. She greeted huskily. Morning. Naruto reciprocated as he pulled her hips forward and she bent down to lightly kiss. Sakura groaned happily as she stood back up and her glazed eyes looked from her lover's attire to Ino's lack of one. Ino, a word, sure. Ino grinned, knowing why she wanted to talk. As they both turned into the hallway, both girls looked at the mirror and could easily see Naruto staring at theirs and comparing them, and they smiled at the look he unknowing KY sent their way. Finally, Ino jumped into Sakura's body and wrapped her in a desperate hug. Please tell me you'd be fine with a three-way. Ino's legs quivered. She knew not to ask for a time with him alone with Sakura to hold her back. Sakura giggled at her horny, crazed roommate and Light tried to push her away. Down girl. Pee please. Ino stuttered cutely and hugged herself tightly, drawing the silk robe closer. Sakura smirked at Ino's meager attempt to convince her to let her seduce her lover. Not that it didn't do anything. They had their time together since boarding school, their bad times and their good times learning about the other's body and where girls liked it, but it was all in fun. In that girls' school, there hadn't been boys to fight over. And the thought of doing that with Ino wasn't off the table. Sakura and Ino had talked about it before, but she doubted they'd end up doing it. Is that why you're dressed like that? Sakura quipped, smiling lightly. Trying to seduce him, Ino let out a quick sound of offense. Sakura, I would never. Ino paused to grin at her best friend. I didn't even know that he was here when I got home. And forget that little tidbit. Ino grinned widely. You finally had after 10 years. Wah, I didn't. Sakura, you're glowing. Ino cooed as she lightly pushed Sakura back. Sakura let a soft love-dove smile grace her face, complete with a bit lip between her teeth as she began to play with a strand of hair. So, how was it? He was amazing, Ino. Ino smiled bigger as Sakura's eyes gleamed with sparkles and shined. Speaking of amazing, is Naruto still checking me out? Sakura managed to subdue her love-struck stupor and glanced at the mirror behind Ino, and indeed her lover was gazing at her, though trying and failing miserably to look away. She smiled. What a player. Yeah, he is. Sakura confirmed. He can't help but stare. Damn. Ino quirked her eyebrow. Maybe he's trying for a better score, huh? 2 roommates is better than 1. Oi, back down you freak. Me. Ino guffawed. You had that man ready to ride you to hell and back and you expect me to believe that you two only did it once in high school. Ino glanced a look back and smiled at Naruto, who weakly smiled back. I mean, he's such a perv, and, Ino bit her lip. And some hot stuff. Sakura blushed like a tomato, smiling at the memory as she gazed back at him. We were both holding back, Ino. We were teens afraid to go past that line. But I mean, we did other things, you know. Now Ino grinned widely. Hell yeah you did. You were not as inexperienced as I thought when I got my claws in you. Sakura blushed. Yeah, I did know how to kiss, among other things. She spoke as Ino smiled back at her. But a moment of disappointment reached her face. But, you didn't tell him, did you? Sakura's happy demeanor plunged down a deep ravine of depression and Sakura lightly glared at her friend. Ino, it's not something I can just say randomly. Course you can. Ino shrugged. Naruto has a right to know, Sakura. I spoke to him for a bit. He cares for you. You can tell him. Sakura bit back with venomous words. And say what? Oh Naruto, about a month after I left you, I found out that I was carrying your child, but don't worry. I lost her, so no alimony. Ino hissed at Sakura's harsh sounds and drew back. Sakura had lashed out at her before, and she didn't want to be too close. I think he would have been there anyways. He seems so in love with you. Sakura had the decency to shrug. We were in deep waters back in high school. We sunk so deep into the romance that we would have saved the other without even looking twice. Then how do you want to play this? Ino questioned as Sakura shrugged helplessly. I don't know. Last night, he said just until the wedding, I'll take it. Sakura, this isn't healthy for either of you, to get in so deep with your hearts and then stop again as if it was all just good fun. You know that you have a hard emotional time getting over guys, so if it gets more than physical. It's just so we're fine, Ino. Sakura whispered angrily, moving around the corner. You told me to him. I told you to tell him the truth and then him. I didn't mean to imply stretching this out for weeks. Do you realize the strain on your heart? Ino sighed in defeat. So much for a clear action plan ahead. Just wing it. Just. Don't be surprised when stuff hits the fan, okay? 20 minutes later, Naruto and the two practically girls sat on the couch, conversing lightly and getting to know each other better. A cup of coffee lay empty in Ino's hand as she closely watched Sakura and Naruto sip their tea while animatedly recalling some story from middle school. I did not. You were so checking me out then. I was. You are impossible. Ino giggled at their petty dispute. Naruto had remembered Sakura's preferred style of tea perfectly, with a hint here or there from Ino, and he did look fine in the kitchen, like he lived here or something. Ino sighed. It was time. She should give them space. Well, Ino stood up and looked at Naruto, her robe once more lying undone and her nubile body proudly displayed. Unlike my amazing roommate here, I must get ready for work. What? Sakura held down her last sip of tea and leaned over Naruto, her borrowed shirt opening up to show the top of her chest as she did so. You don't have a court case today. Ino smiled at Sakura's choice of wear. She looked just like a satisfied girlfriend after a night in the bedroom, but Ino knew her better, and saw the nervous jitter of her legs. She wanted more fun. I have 2 depositions and a witness to prep at my office. Ino smiled maliciously towards her friend and turned to walk away, but not before swinging her body side to side, as Naruto ogled her entire backside showing through the lingerie. He had done his best not to stare, but having 2 scantily dressed women around him had been his downfall. How was he supposed to hold himself back and then not look? Ino had sat not on the cushion beside him to match his height, but instead leaned on the armrest, pushing her chest towards his head height. Even with Sakura pressing into his arm and leg to distract him, he always gave the person talking his attention and so his eyes glanced down occasionally. In his blind spot, Sakura stuck her tongue out playfully as Ino sashayed away. What a temptress! Tempting her poor lover with her backside as she walked away, and as she left them alone, Sakura's stomach pooled with lava as she began to heat back up. She wrapped her arms around the side of Naruto's body and kissed her lover's cheek with a coo. Sakura grinned wider as Naruto blushed deeply, probably realizing that she'd just caught him gazing at another girl, and her roommate to boot. Well, she had to educate him. Naruto groaned as Sakura slid over his crotch to hang off his neck and straddle his lap as either of her knees pressed into the cushion by her waist. It is so fine to look, Naruto. Sakura whispered seductively into his ear. Ino was easily voted the hottest in my girls' school. Honestly, I'd think something was wrong if you didn't look. Sakura goaded him before a little bit of envy surfaced on her face. She's more beautiful than me. Sakura looked down at herself. She was pretty average, wasn't she? At least, That's what Sakura thought just as Naruto's fingers slipped under the shirt and began to grope her. Sakura blushed and began to squirm a bit, her bear grinding against his thigh as he openly played with her. But just as she got used to this, his hands moved themselves higher, pushing her shirt, or rather his shirt, up to her chest. Naru. Sakura needed no more clues as she raised her hands up as he pulled the material off, and casually grazed along her S, as Sakura leaned back and felt her nipples hardening under his thumbs as he rubbed them up to their proud height, protruding outwards in a desire for more stimulation. I think there are parts of you that beat her. Naruto murmured through Sakura's fogged state. Oh, your brain. She's a lawyer, Sakura refuted, but Naruto's hand slipped lower, pulling her closer. Naruto whispered as Sakura moaned and nodded along. It was her best figure she thought about herself, and even Ino had talked on how she wished she had her, so that was a plus. By now, Naruto was just rambling all the things he loved about her body. Your S are nice and firm, Naruto breathed, ending suddenly. Sakura had to disagree with him on that. Ino's S were her best feature. No, hers are Sakura began before she felt her neck pull tight against her. Sakura gazed over to see Naruto's hand gripping the blue necklace that had laid between her S. With a graceful and stunned pace, he pulled it, and by extension her, face down to meet his, with only a few inches between this. Why you still wear this? Now it was Sakura's eyes that edged with guilt as her face blushed a storm as if she had been caught wetting the bed. Well, yeah, I always wear it, always. Sakura glanced back to see Naruto smile wide at her response, before he widened his eyes. And how could I forget the most important feature of yours? Sakura quirked her head to the side, wondering what else he could say. He had talked about all her Y portions. But Naruto reached up and cupped her face and kissed the space of her forehead before meeting her gaze. Your eyes. That warmth in Sakura's stomach took on a new sound, like the sizzling of Kobe steak out on the grill, except it was not one or two, all the burners, and all available pieces of meat were sizzling in her ears. Sakura's eyes grew lidded as her mind took her back to high school, back to that roof where her feelings had morphed forever. How could they have changed? Well, he said he liked her eyes. Her heart fluttered and crescendoed atop of her caring, doting, amazing lover, and Naruto looked up through her lidded eyes as if worried he'd said the wrong thing. You okay? Sakura looked deep into his eyes, her green eyes burning with desire. Naruto was still an idiot. It was a stupid question to ask her. He knew what she wanted right now, and yet it made her even hotter knowing that he was making her say it, like admitting to it would make it better, it always did. I want you, now. Naruto smiled, seeing Sakura in a state once more of an aroused mess. Just like in the bar, she was ready to go, and she was already out of a dress. He couldn't deny her after last night and their promise. His smile widened. Ino was right. This was the time to end things right. They'd have their fun and remain friends for the rest of their lives after the fact. But out here in the living room, maybe after Ino leaves, Naruto chuckled and began to sit up and found he was trapped. Sakura's response was to grind him into his own frenzy as she slunk closer, her lips a mere inch from his, their eyes never shifting off the other as their rebellious who cares attitude blazed dangerously back at him. She can watch for all I care. I'm going to tell her everything later anyways. So what do you say? Or rather, do. Naruto shrugged in defeat and brought her down the last inch, and they began to moan as they made out and got ready for round 2. Past 12 years ago. She moved down the street towards her destination, making a string of honks erupt behind her as she casually biked down the middle of the lanes, blocking the annoyed drivers behind her. She smirked and rolled her eyes at the angry words people threw at her. She didn't care what they thought. She didn't care what most people thought of her. Their words beaded down her body, wicking off her like waterproof armor. They were nothing. Finally, she leaned into the right and turned down the residential street she wanted, leaving the revving of engines behind as she pedaled her way towards the end of the cul-de-sac. By now it was past midnight, but she was optimistic that her friend would be up and about, and if not, well, she'd wake him up. For some reason or another, he could never say no to her, and that thought made her grin darkly, thinking of the things she could make him do for her and what she could want from him. The girl wore a pair of Converse, and bare legs followed up all the way to her crotch, covered only by the thinnest of lycra, and as she slowed, a skirt billowed around to cover herself better, but it made her look like such a tease that she loved the style. On top of that was a plaid gray tank top, leaving her cleavage and the red cups of her bra hinting out, and all covered up by a thin black jacket. With a red choker on her neck and some black dye mixed along some random strands in her hair, she knew that she was an arresting sight to anyone that looked in her direction. That's exactly what she was going for. She slid to a halt on the grass of the house before her, churning the lawn into a pile of dirt where she stopped and looked up at the window, with its bright light just peeking out from behind the curtain. A small frown graced her face and she instinctively knew that he wasn't in there with the light on. The girl glanced around the house before looking at the roof and sighed. She guessed it would be the hard way. Life ed. His life ed so hard. There was nothing that mattered. They were born, they lived, and then they died. That's all there was. What mattered anymore? A young teen sniffled his nose as the cold wind nipped at his face. Naruto pulled his hoodie closer to his face, pulling his leg against his chin as he wiped at his eyes with his knee. His eyes he knew looked pathetic, all teared up, and his face was probably slick with salt down his cheeks. He'd had a feeling these past few months that something was wrong, that he was being given everything he asked for. Everything had been too perfect this week, and his parents had tonight confirmed his feelings. After dinner, when the sun was about to set, one of a rare few where his parents were actually home for once, they had asked him to stay for a bit, patting the couch seat between them. Naruto had grimaced at the buzzing cascade of texts that were burning up his phone. He had manned up and asked for his own cell phone that he'd wanted since forever, and he wanted to call this girl he had a crush on, and ask her to meet up before curfew and all. So he had frowned at them and sat down with attitude. And then they had just told him up front, bursting the week's happy atmosphere. They were dying. All the questions he would have asked, they beat him to it. No. There was no cure. No. It was going to be slow. No. It was going to hurt worse as time went on. Yes. He was going to be alone in the world, but if he wanted to, his godparents would be able to take care of him. They had expected him to cry, but he didn't. He refused to cry in front of them, when they had looked so frail and distraught over how he might act with the new knowledge. He waited for them to go to work, because even with the fact that they were dead soon, they still had a business to run and work to do. Tears flooded down his cheeks as he sobbed into his knees, his feet holding him up on the roof hidden in the shadows behind the slant of the ceiling in his window. Now he knew why they never yelled at him when he acted out, why they just smiled when he yelled at them for being unfair. What was a 14-year-old to do? He had just started high school 3 months ago. Naruto, you up here? A voice called out to him, making him snap his head up and crawl over to the edge to widen his eyes in shock. There was his crush, Sakura Haruno, the school rebel. He'd never gone to her middle school, but everyone had told him on day one that she was trouble, to stay away from her. He liked a girl who teased him constantly and made suggestions about the two of them that sounded UAL, but weren't. She punched him when he was trying to be funny, and called him An when he tried to compliment her. She was the first girl who he'd met at high school. In homeroom, she had sat down in front of him wearing the most provocative outfit he'd ever seen, and her skirts. He swore she never wore panties, but every time they billowed up, those damn shorts were in the way, and then she'd catch him looking and punch his arm. Or slap the backside of his head. Or smile dangerously at him. He should have looked elsewhere, and yet that only served to draw him in. She had turned around that first day, looked him up and down, and grinned impishly. "Stay away from me." Those were her first words to him. Who says that? That's the girl who he'd been seeing and trying to vainly impress the last 3 months. This girl who was hanging off his home gutter with her arms hanging on by her fingertips, and giving him the best of views down her top right now. Hey. Naruto stammered, his eyes skimming across the top of her chest. Sakura smiled up at him, her eyes telling him that she knew where he was looking. "Hey, can I come up? Please do." Naruto eagerly nodded as Sakura swung her legs side to side to build momentum and then pulled up with her arms, swinging her leg up and onto the roof as she stood up, but not before giving the teen boy another great view of her covered in those damn near translucent lycra shorts she loved to wear. Naruto cleared his throat and looked back down the 2 stories to the grass of his backyard. She must have climbed up by the gutter pipe the whole way. Did you free climb that? Yeah, you could have gotten hurt. So, Sakura edged her head to the side before casting a gentle smile his way. "I wanted to see you." A gust of wind blew her skirt and hair to the side as she mewed and tried to keep her hair out of her face, hiding the jump of Naruto's heart at her words, and the amount of pain he inflicted on himself to hold down his outburst of affection for her. For months, he had worked up the courage to talk to her, ignoring his middle school friends and their warnings. 3 weeks after school started, he'd asked to be on her science project so that they'd have time alone in the study room for an hour every day at school. It was the first time her eyes widened in shock to see him waiting for her with the notes from class after a detention. The plan had worked, and one day, while they were doing their homework, she had opened up to him, casually inviting him on her escapades if he so dared. He had taken her offer, joining in her little crimes that got his heart pumping with a nervous energy that made her shine before his eyes even more. She began to smile towards him, a personal smile that she didn't show to others. She spoke to him about her worries about making lasting friends, telling him about the jocks that wanted to her for the fun of it, and how insecure she felt about what they might do. He'd almost blown his cover to be her best friend. He offered to find dirt on those jocks for her, but she'd just smiled and said that she'd already taken care of them. Naruto had looked back down at his notes, dejected at his loss, and yet, when she'd squeezed his thigh, thanking him for the concern, he had almost blown his load. It was the next day when those same jocks had run out of the locker room, with pink food dye mixed into the water in the showers, and he knew that she didn't need him to fight her battles for her, he could just support her. Nowadays though, because he did support her and got caught a few times doing so, some were calling him the prankster of Konoha, and just yesterday, when they were running around, Sakura had tackled him to the ground and whispered that he was a prankster right into his ear. Directly into his ear. Can you believe that? The beating of his heart, the skips of the beat, the clammy hands he was feeling, the shallow breaths he took and tried to keep quiet. His depressing outlook seemed to disappear when she was right here in front of him. Maybe life was a little bit more than just living. Maybe romance had something to do with it. He was hoping he was getting her to like him over time because he loved no liked her. He just had to not make a fool of himself. He'd been doing a good job, right? Hey, what's wrong? Sakura's voice pierced through his stupor, and Naruto looked away, hiding his tear-stained face by sitting down facing the street. It's nothing. Tell me. Sakura insisted, sitting down beside him as she stroked her small fingers along his forearm. Naruto quivered. He loved physical contact. It was after the jock prank that she began to touch him like this, how she ever so slightly grazed her skin up against his. How she always did it so casually as if they'd always done this, and every time, it sent his heart racing. But most of all, he couldn't say no to her when she touched him. He wanted to be strong in front of her. For months he'd tried doing so. Girls hated a guy who cried on front of them, right? But as Naruto looked at her, her eyes as curious and concerned as they had ever seemed before, he began to crack. Why couldn't he impress her? Hey! Sakura smiled as she rubbed at his cheeks, drying his tears with the pad of her thumb. Please. You know I won't tell anyone. I promise. My parents, they grew up with this children's disease when they were young. They cured it early on, Jinchuriki syndrome or something like that, but they're going to die. Naruto muttered, his voice hoarse with the sobbing he'd been doing on the roof for hours. Sakura nodded along. That's been in the news recently. People can live for years though, right? Well, yeah, but Naruto. Sakura smiled and rubbed his cheek. Cherish the time you have with them. That's all you can do. They told you because they know you can handle it. I'm sure of that. Thanks, Sakura. I needed that. Anytime. Naruto sniffled away his tears and smiled back at a beaming Sakura. His gloomy day always turned sunny when she smiled at him like that. He didn't need to worry about his depression now. Sakura cared about him. He'd do just what she said. He'd be the best son he could be for his parents before they passed on. He hoped that took many, many years to come. Hey, why are you here so late? And how do you know where I lived? Naruto realized that the moon was high in the sky, casting an ethereal glow on the girl next to him. Sakura toothily grinned at him. Couldn't sleep. I paired our phones this morning when I gave you my number, remember? I figured that I could sneak into your room and cuddle with you in bed. With me. I in my bed. Naruto stuttered before Sakura giggled back, the joke falling out with a giggle. Naruto pouted, puffing his cheeks to hide the reddening of his nose at the thought of this fine lady beside him in bed. Sorry. That was too good to pass up. Sakura breathed heavily before bringing her own knees up and looked out over the night's horizon. I was hoping that you'd be awake. Well, I'm here for you. Naruto affirmed, pausing at how lame he just sounded before shrugging. So why can't you sleep? Do you ever think that you were born into the wrong family? Sakura spoke quietly, staring off into the great unknown. No, I thought not. You have such a caring family, Naruto. I envy that, I guess. I envy a lot of people's love for another. It's so warm when I see them smiling. Sakura. Naruto whispered back, scooting a little closer to be in her vision. Sakura turned her head to rest on her kneecap, looking back at him. My parents were fighting again. Sakura hinted at, and Naruto nodded along. He would try to rub her back, but he was scared that she'd think the wrong thing and he'd lose the trust and bond they now shared. What about? Naruto questioned and immediately saw the firecracker that was Sakura Haruno go off. Nothing. They just fight all the time. They never agree about anything. Sakura spouted out. I mean, my mom apparently sent an investigator to get pictures of my dad dancing with this other girl, but my dad hired a different guy to get evidence of her sleeping with his best friend. Wow, Naruto gulped. That's pretty messed up. Sakura's eyes shimmered with angry tears, but he knew they wouldn't fall. She was too strong for that. Yeah, my parents are screwed up. I mean, money's not an issue for us. Shouldn't money solve everything? Naruto had never asked. He didn't need to. The skirt she wore right now was probably $800. The jacket an original by a famous actress. She had nearly perfect grades because she had a private tutor. Her house was 3 times bigger than his. Sakura's family was a very wealthy, well-off family, and yet the family unit they had was nothing. He had only gone inside once so far, to grab some things for their project, and the way that her mom had not even looked at her made him disturbed. Sakura told him that it was normal. That she was used to it. Naruto turned from the night sky and froze when he saw them. Tears. They were bubbling at her eyes, threatening to fall. He had to stop them. Wait here, Naruto called out as Sakura looked back at him in surprise. After he moved away, she silently sniffled and wiped away the tears that almost fell down her cheeks. Naruto ducked back into his window and Sakura breathed out shakily. Don't break down. Don't break down, Sakura spoke to herself a mantra. Naruto was her friend, but they'd only been friends so long. She couldn't throw all this burden on him. She had to be strong, yet every damn week, she was opening up to him. She was letting her inner thoughts be spoken. She had to show herself as confident, strong, resilient, independent. Guys liked girls like that, right? Naruto came back out and Sakura readjusted herself to face him as he bent back down excitedly. Hold out your hand. Okay, here you go. Naruto smiled as he put a box in her palm. I got you something. Sakura edged her head cutely. For me. Naruto nodded and so she shrugged and opened it. Immediately her eyes widened and she looked back at Naruto in shock. A stunned smile appeared on her face at the blue sapphire necklace that lay inside. What's this for? You like it? I love it. I mean, blue is so not my color, but I like it a lot. Sakura exclaimed as she jumped forward, engulfing Naruto in a massive hug that he readily accepted. After 10 seconds or so, both young teens blushed from the realization of their positions and backed up, Sakura fingering the necklace as she brought it to her eyes. Why'd you get me a gift? It is your birthday today, right? Naruto shrugged. Sakura gawked as she stared at him as he rambled on. I wanted to see you today, but I had to work for my parents at the shop and then that project had been done, and I sort of lost track of time and, why yeah. Sakura blushed. Were you going to give this to me tomorrow in front of everyone at school? Naruto grinned sarcastically. Of course not. Not you, the girl who just hates attention. Even though he meant it as a joke, Sakura blushed guilty, remembering how she had coerced Naruto just last week into painting the school mascot pink. Man, the principal had looked mad at them last Thursday when they shared a detention for the first time. He put it on me? Sakura asked as Naruto nodded. Sakura turned away as Naruto's fingers nervously pulled the necklace to her neck and around it, their bodies close as he snapped the clasp in place, as the necklace fell upon her skin and slipped into her cleavage. Sakura felt his hand on her shoulder and reached for it with her own, finding the comfort pleasant. How does it look? Like a Valkyrie charging into battle. Sakura smiled grimly. My parents didn't even remember. I'm sure they were busy. No one cares about me. Someone does. She heard Naruto insist, leaning over her shoulder, but Sakura's tears finally won and began to flow. She had no one. Who cares if I? Whatever thoughts were in her head, they stopped the second that a set of warm lips caressed against her own. Sakura moaned as she sighed into the kiss, her lips moving against the pair that pressed too hard into her own, that tried to slip out a tongue that licked her cheek more than her lip, but still her body quivered as her hands reached out to hold the hands of her partners, leaning further into the kiss as the sound of their lips smacking the air sounded between the huge breaths of air that they shared. And then they parted, as Sakura's mascara began to run a bit, and she stared at him confused. He smiled guiltily as she watched him rub her cheeks, tracing away the salty water. You have such beautiful eyes, Sakura. They are so expressive, but such beautiful eyes shouldn't shed tears. They should glow with intensity and happiness. Sakura was stunned and looked at a new light. Naruto for himself backed up and rubbed at the back of his neck. Quote. What was that? Sakura voiced, causing Naruto to blush deeply and breathed in. She watched as he became redder until finally he confessed. Naruto gulped. I care for you. I mean, I really like you, Sakura. Naruto cursed himself. He'd only known her for 3 months. Sakura was smart and attractive, she'd never settle for a guy like. Not that. Sakura smiled lovingly, her cheeks as bright as her hair as she reached over and stroked his cheek, bringing him closer as she smirked dopily. I've known you liked me for months. What? You couldn't have. I mean, when you kept staring at my on the first day of school, I thought it was nice to be admired, but when I walked in after detention to the science project you asked to be paired with me, I knew it then. You mean that I? Yep. Sakura smiled cheekily. But that kiss was pathetic. Yeah, well, it was my first okay. Naruto looked away. There it was. She knew. And she was making fun of him for it. It was his first kiss. Crush. Everything. What was he supposed to? Shut up. Sakura cut him off, her fingers tightening on his shirt's collar to pull him closer, until they were staring into the other's eyes. Can you read my thoughts, Naruto? What I'm thinking right now? No. Naruto thought. She couldn't possibly not about him. That I'm a bad kisser. Sakura nuzzled her nose along his and smiled. No. That you need practice. Naruto widened his eyes in glee before glancing down at her lips, with a sheen to them. Too tantalizing to not nibble and press against once more. Both teens smiled, their confessions as clear as day under the moonlight, and leaned in as they shared their first full-fledged kiss on the roof. This kiss was different than the first. The first kiss was comforting, gentle, and innocent. This second kiss was still innocent, but was curious and inquisitive. Naruto tried tilting his head, and Sakura mewed a little more. Sakura began to slip her tongue out time after time, trying without words to ask him to do the same. But their limbs were a different story. As they kissed, Sakura's right hand flew to the back of his neck, pulling him deeper and deeper, trying to control the pace. Her left hand slid along his chest, but it was trapped between the both of them as she sculpted over his chest. Meanwhile, Naruto's rogue hands were more perverse, stroking along her arms and then along her thigh. Sakura's eyes shook open as Naruto's fingers slipped under her skirt, and stroked along her shorts, which he was finding out that indeed, she did not wear panties under them. Sakura's eyes rolled back at the rather dominant behavior as he stroked the skin at the edges. She felt her stomach churn with a new intensity, and she liked it and wanted to show this side of Naruto, the confident, daring, loving side of her boyfriend. Hey Naruto. Sakura breathed heavily after what felt like hours underwater, as Naruto began to explore lower, along her jawline, and Sakura mewed as he barely missed groping her s. Oh, she wanted to see him dip into her cleavage. Yeah, Naruto muttered along her neck, too focused on discovering the little weak spots that made Sakura mew for him. So, there's a party tomorrow night, only juniors and sophomores, you want to go? Crash a party. Yeah, depends. On what? Sakura breathed, as she shook madly, before Naruto was suddenly in front of her again. Smirking dangerously like a predator about to eat her. The prey. Are you my girlfriend? Sakura gulped, the feeling of the word making something flip and twist inside of her. Was that her heart clenching? She wearily nodded her head. But Naruto frowned and grazed her thigh, eliciting a more feral mewl. I want to hear you say it. The wild ride just never ended for one Sakura Haruno. The night Naruto had stormed into her life became a maelstrom of activity. They had ate all night and a few times the following morning. Sakura had smiled in the middle of their passionate array as Ino tried to sneak out to work without being spotted. She would have made it too, had she not been too curious and snuck a peek just before the hallway to the front door. Sakura giggled now 6 days later, having ended her light day shift from last night. Ino had not stopped talking and jabbering on at how envious she was at Sakura. Hearing how Naruto spent a little too much time doting on her needs more than his own had sent her fanning herself and joking hard. It was a side of Ino that Sakura hadn't truly appreciated until now, but she was truly happy. Her heart wouldn't stop racing up and down as if going on marathons of deadly proportions. At the sound of her phone ringing even once, Sakura's eyes shot open and jumped over the couch to grab at the sleek device. Hello. Afternoon, my crafty vixen. Oh, you sly fox, you. Sakura giggled, as Ino looked over at her, smiling widely back at her from the lounge chair. Were you lonely? Nah. Naruto tried to deflect. Sakura though smiled darker as she laid down into the plush of the couch. Quote. She's driving you crazy, huh? Oh my god. Yes. She wants to change the seating chart again. Because her friend refuses to sit next to this one guy who she had a fling with 4 days ago. And then she won't stop asking me about flowers, but then she just makes the decision herself anyways. You want to go somewhere? Where were you thinking? Maybe a hike. Just some clear, fresh air. I'm in the mood for some hot air actually. Oh, believe me, my vixen, hot air I have. Then I suppose I could be persuaded to join you. I'll pick you up in 20. Sakura giggled and ended the call, before pushing off and heading to her room. She quickly shed herself down to her bare skin and looked at her clothes, wondering what would look good for hiking. Why do you have to go anywhere, Sakura? Ino cajoled as she slipped inside. Naruto could just ravage you right here as you are. Ino. We're not just we're. Ino replied unconvinced. Sure. I totally believe you after that booty call just now. Booty. Sakura began to interject before smirking a little as she looked down at herself and back up. That's my best attribute. Hell yeah it is. Ino smirked as she handed Sakura her classic spandex shorts for underwear. She'd never grown out of them for most purposes. Sakura smiled as Ino took over for her, being more fashion-forward than her and who loved playing dress-up. Naruto loves worshipping my. Sakura hummed. Fine, it may be a booty call, but it's not like I'm expecting any less either. Sakura. Ino asked as she held up a nice shirt in front of her before turning back to the closet. What do you do besides? Oh, you know, stuff. Sakura quietly muttered, the tips of her nose and ears dusting with a red hue. Explicit. Yes. Yes. Oh god yes. Came a muffled scream as a chassis of a car shook back and forth. You like that? Sounded a inebriated call to the body beneath them. Oh yes. Me like you want me. Sakura moaned incessantly as Naruto pounded away, thrusting into her so roughly as he practically urged his to pierce her cervix in half. Phased as she was, Sakura tried to look around at the carnage, at the spirited love-making, but from the position she was in, she was powerless to do anything but embrace and welcome the amazing feelings coursing through her. For there she was, in the backseat of her truck with tinted windows, her plaid jacket torn apart to her elbows, her top pulled up to her neck, with her knees above her shoulder to her chin, her feet hanging around Naruto's shoulders as he eyed her like a madman possessed. Was he trying to knock her up? You like this? Yeah. God yes, Naru. Me so good. Sakura mewled, trying desperately to squeeze him even closer and harder to her. Well, here I come. Naruto yelled as he leaned even further, kissing her deeply with lips and a sloppy tongue as he ejaculated as deep and as slow as he could, bringing Sakura into her own realized bliss, coming for the 5th time she swore in the last hour. End explicit. God. Sakura thought as her brain fogged over, the euphoria engulfing the both of them as their eyes glossed with a lustful sheen. Her pelvis hurt like a bitch, her legs dangling haphazardly, useless as they were, but nothing felt bad. Her entire body surged with contentness and the pain was an amazing rush that led to a starry-eyed lover underneath her man. As the two breathed heavily through the surging motions, the muscles in their bodies jittering alongside one another, Sakura's eyes fluttered close as she fell into the deep recesses of her thoughts. She felt complete. Here she lay, her sweat-ridden body against the leather of the backseat, the heat of the day scorching its hot rays into the car, only heating it up more. If they stayed here, they could die in such a cramped space. So why was she fine with this particular line of thought? It was because of this feeling of this man beside her. Why was it that every time they ed, it was perfect? Already 6 days of positions that she'd never tried, 6 days that her body had been sweetly sore, 6 days of lovemaking that made her heart swell. And then after every time came the lovely strokes. She felt Naruto begin to slow, as his hands sculpted across the upper thighs of her legs, pulling her even wider as he backed up, and she shivered as his length pulled out of her, leaving her in a state of wanton lust. She looked right at Naruto and urged him to pierce her again, her eyes zeroed in and dilated with a single thought in her eyes. She needed him inside her, where he belonged. She loved him. Sakura turned her head to hide her shame as she realized her thoughts bubbling out once again. She shouldn't be thinking of things like that. Just enjoy the fact that they were so perfect at the UAL art that they had built up when they were younger. Enjoy the way Naruto smiled down at her in that weird, perverse way that made her heart skip a beat. Not like this. Not with her heart pulsing and her throat constricting, trying to hold her heart from lurching out its emotions. She couldn't tell him those words again. She had to hold it in. For the sake of her own sanity and not to hurt him. Naruto smiled as he slipped further back, and her legs flopped to the seats, as Sakura mewled at the coarse feeling between her legs. I'm sorry, miss. Naruto spoke conceitedly, a stupidly self-righteous grin etched on his face. I believe I ed your brains out. Shut up. Sakura weakly retorted and tried to sit up, but the feeling of her legs fought against her, wanting to enjoy the feelings longer. She hissed as she finally got them to move. Geez Naruto, you ed me raw. That just means I'm doing it right. Oh, you're doing it all right. Sakura rolled her eyes at his statement, trying to ignore the way that her cheeks warmed at the fact that he satisfied her every time they did this. Sakura looked outside at the setting sun and frowned. We were supposed to go on a hike. Oh, right. Naruto rolled his eyes as Sakura tried to put on her clothes in the cramped space, pulling her top down while jumping in place for the lower half to fit. It is not my fault. You wearing that kind of outfit caused this to happen in the first place. What? Sakura glanced back indignantly, finally pulling them up. I'm wearing cargo shorts, mister. Exactly. Look at these luscious legs just begging to be punished. Naruto emphasized as he stroked along the bare skin, making Sakura's body shiver happily as her endorphins began to fire up again once more. I do like to be punished. Sakura muttered as Naruto reached over and led on her neck. Then I'm right, and you're wrong. Sakura mewled. Why is it, Naruto, that when we're together, you're so dominant? Like, you have to be right for now but not when we're just catching up and talking. Well, I don't know. My goal is mainly, I like getting you off. Flirting with you. You like how I do it, right? Yeah. Sakura smiled and leaned into him, pressing her neck into his lips. She might get a hickey from this. Hey, Naruto muttered as he backed up, looking around them. I just noticed. Isn't this just like the car that you stole in high school? Jerk. Sakura scoffed and playfully slapped his arm. I stole that car after you, sir, coerced me. I did not. You so did. Telling me how you wanted to take me on a date but you had no car. How only a real date could be experienced when a guy picked a girl up at home. That was true. And then you pointed out how that car was unlocked, but you had to be so confident that only a real rebel could do it. Sakura huffed. Quote. And you did. I did. Sakura smiled and nuzzled closer, bringing their lips together as her hand strayed to his, which he'd still not bothered to cover up this entire time. I guess we're not really going hiking then, huh? Naruto smirked and pushed her back down, once again working on the button of her shorts. What do you think? Sakura grinned. You're insatiable. Nah, I'm good for at least an hour, Sakura. But you look like you could get a good licking or two in. Sakura's body straightened happily, her chest pushing out excitedly at that. Naruto smirked as he molested her neck once again, working her into a frenzy. Man. Naruto groaned as his fingers slid inside of her. It's nice to be immature once in a while. And while her body responded wonderfully, her insides coiling around him as her limbs pulled around his neck and waist, Sakura's face frowned at that phrase. Immature. Sakura thought. Was that what they were doing? He still saw her as a horny teenager. She could be mature too. And so Sakura was stuck thinking about that as the two lovers began to work themselves up to the next crescendo of the evening. Haruno. Sakura jumped in place as she began to turn left to join the other female officers heading for the lockers. She turned and gazed back into the doorway of the bullpen where the higher-ranking officers' desks resided and walked over to the closest desk to gaze at her captain of the whole precinct, Captain Kakashi. Yes, boss. I just wanted to say that was a great job today. Sakura frowned, however, unsure as she was after only 3 years on the force. I wasn't getting in the way. A good cop does their job. A great cop figures out the clues that people leave behind. Kakashi looked up and spoke into her eyes. Sir? Sakura questioned, noticing his detached demeanor. Quote. I saw that you put in for a detective detail request with Precinct 10. Sakura grinned warily. They had an opening. I swear I wouldn't leave you shorthanded so soon without telling you. I understand. Actually, one of the detectives is retiring soon. Who? Now you know I can't say. Anyways, maybe you just send me a request as well while you're at it, nay. Sakura grinned. I'll do it today. Glad to hear it. Sakura smiled widely as a man she respected walked back away and she made her way to the lockers to change out of her uniform now that her shift was at an end. 20 minutes later, Sakura stepped out of the shower, freshly cleaned and ready to start her afternoon off right. Yeah, that's right. This past week had her on 14-hour night duties, covering another patrol, and filing reports about all that went on. Her fingers cramped so bad and her eyes just wanted to sleep and find rest. She bet that she could sleep anywhere right now. She was a fresh, clean zombie on unbloodied dead legs. Sakura opened her locker though and smiled at the flowery sundress that lay inside. It was sheer, and would cause people to stare, but it covered her rather well enough, down below her knees, and made her look cute. She wanted to look cute today. Just as Sakura moved to grab the fabric, a huge squeal erupted from the other end of the lockers and she turned to see 3 girls all hugging each other. I'm so happy for you, Maria. Yeah, you take that man home with you. Way to snag him. Not like that, girls. Maria blushed terribly, trying to bat them aside. I've known him and his family for years. Still, Maria. So glad he proposed. He's a nice guy. And why too? Back off. He's mine. Sakura smiled for the girl, having worked with her just last week and had seen her belly growing. She deserved to be happy. And yet as Sakura turned back, the girls next to her whispered their own thoughts on the occasion. I thought she was dating his brother. Wasn't she? So she was ing around with the both of them. What a. No wonder the guy asked her to marry him. Who's the father after all? Sakura hid herself behind the metal door of the locker and closed her eyes as a few tears cascaded down her cheek. The girl's words hit too close to home for her right now. What was she doing? Ing another woman's fiance, and was she trying to get pregnant and ruin the marriage? Girls and their little groups of gossip, they were cruel sometimes. A ghostly stab of pain shot through her as she lowered her towel and her emerald orbs stared at the mirror inside, as she watched her fingers slide over the silver scar that became permanent on the side of her stomach just over 9 years ago. She was forever reminded of the tragedy that had happened, and the repercussions from that event had changed her forever. The past whispers flowed through her mind, taking her back to a time when she wasn't as strong as she was today. Some had been a little envious of her, thinking that she had a secret boyfriend hidden on the grounds or nearby and they knocked her up. Others said that she had escaped from a bad relationship and came to the boarding school to hide out. But it was the mean girls who had always been the worst. No one really knew she had been pregnant, she'd hidden it pretty well, but they all knew after her accident. But when those girls had suggested rape and incest, she had punched them. Then one girl had said that it was from her ness. Sakura shivered. That night, if Ino hadn't been there, well, she would have been in a worse place, to put it mildly. The truth hurts sometimes. Because she had been of her boyfriend. That first makeout session when they were 14, and their innocent touches had quickly morphed into something like 2 backs in one body. The next night at that party meant for older students had them cheering the one-day-old couple as they Frenched against a wall, their clothes sliding this way and that as the sound of a breaking vase echoed in her memory. It hadn't been long, maybe 2 months later, when she had grabbed Naruto's hand and placed it on her as they cuddled on the couch of his home. Through the 2 years they'd been together, the two had been inseparable, and after only a year, Sakura had bared all for him and he for her, and they had lightly touched. 6 months before she left had been their first time getting the other off, and all of the in-between times had been humping and gyrating in front of anyone who didn't mind seeing them. So no, it wasn't wrong that people thought that they were doing it every night and all the time and experimenting. The two of them never denied it, letting people think what they wanted, because they never realized it anyways. In their eyes, they were experimenting, going full throttle into their relationship. It wasn't until Sakura got older that she realized how easy some people were, going to a club and bringing home a guy or a girl for a night. The culture of today was whoever you want and who cares. Sakura sniffled away and she looked back at herself, tracing her gaze across her body. They'd done the deed, the night before she had moved away to that boarding school, never to see or hear from the other again until a few weeks ago. Sakura shook her hair out and quickly slid into the sundress, and as she closed the locker, she ignored all the playful catcalls sent her way. All these girls had boyfriends or were married now that Maria was getting hitched. So of course Sakura was next on their list as the only one of them not spoken for. For a date, Haruno. A fellow officer jeered chummily. Just or is he gonna pop the question too? Just a stroll. Sakura shrugged as she made her way out of the precinct and walked down a few blocks from where she told Naruto to meet her at. After this agonizing shift, she just wanted to see her lover. Lover? Sakura whispered as she stalled in the middle of the sidewalk as 1 or 2 people stumbled around her, cursing her under their breath. Naruto was marrying another girl in 4 weeks. She shouldn't be doing this-ing around and letting herself believe even in short spurts that he actually loved her and wanted to be with her. The smile on his face when he spotted her every time made her heart swell, and when he left her, it crunched with a pain that she couldn't describe as less than childbirth. I shouldn't, but Sakura voiced before she felt a tear pull out and slide down her cheek, which was followed by a raindrop from the clouds above splitting against her porcelain skin. Sakura gripped at the space above her heart and shivered as it beat strongly. It was always at a frenzy when apart, and yet so calm and content when at his side. Sakura's bleary eyes opened with misery. It was useless. She wouldn't be able to end this on her own, her emotions were too fragile by herself. But then Sakura's shoulders straightened. But together they would. She had Naruto to help push her through the gate and into the rest of life. Just like when she left for the first time, these moments with Naruto would be with her for the rest of her life. Every graze of her thigh, every giggle he evoked from her throat, every feeling of contentment after a carnal display of love. And unlike the first time, the both of them were older, and more mature and would be strong about it and move on together. Together. Sakura didn't believe that last part. But she could hope, right? She shook off her worries and continued walking, for in the present was an amazing afternoon with a man she loved. Besides, she had Ino after all this was through. She'd be fine, probably. The wind blew her hair around her face as if being kissed by an angel. Her lips puffed out cutely every few seconds, her lip gloss shining back at him, tempting him out of this position he found himself in, but he was far too okay with how this must look to anyone around him. For here was Sakura Haruno, a self-proclaimed rebel turned good cop, cutely resting her head on top of his shoulder, sound asleep as they laid back against the trunk of a huge maple tree. Naruto couldn't help himself as he carefully reached into his pocket and angled his phone just right and took a selfie of him and this sleeping angel right beside him. Why were they resting under the shade of a tree in the middle of the afternoon, one might ask? Well, Naruto stared out past the old tree with plenty of leaves and cover at the meadow beyond, where a deluge of rain poured out along the ground, turning the grass into a wet mess of dirt and small puddles. That's how much you could trust Konoha weathermen. Bright and sunny they had claimed. Well, they got the bright right. As for sunny, well, Naruto gazed down at his secret photo, at the shimmering glow behind Sakura. In a way, it was sunny. Sakura growled from her throat as a rogue wind buffeted them and drew herself closer to Naruto's arm, encasing it between her s. He gazed at the beauty beside him as he pulled back a lock of her wet hair. Looking next to them lay her drenched sundress hanging from a dry tree branch. Looking down at her body peeking out from his coat, her skin-colored underwear peeked out, tempting him to unbelievable proportions. This was a ruined date for the day out for the couple, but he couldn't help but think that it was perfect for them. Maybe he was fixated on that fact more than Sakura. There was no one around to bother them, no phone calls from his fiancée about cakes and gowns, and appointments when she would just choose them herself in the end. No employees apologizing for not being able to stay over the clock. No one asking him once more why he had to sell, and not lead them himself. There was peace here, under this tree where his lover lay beside him, and he didn't want to. Naruto. Sakura croaked as she rubbed the crust off her eyes against his shirt, waking up like a lost kid after staying up past their bedtime. Hey, you slept like an hour. Sakura smiled as she snuggled back into him. You're just that comfy, I suppose. Naruto's smile turned grim as she pushed away and looked out at the dreary downpour. Sorry about the weather. Sakura just smiled and stood up, the jacket on her shoulder dropping off to the ground below them as Naruto openly gazed at her nubile body with an excuse of underwear covering her. Sakura bent over and grabbed his arm, pulling him up with her. I don't mind this rain at all. You just have to look at it in a positive light. We could get arrested for public indecency right now if people were here. Naruto leaned closer to her, nuzzling his nose against hers as they lazily held the other. I suppose you're right. They kissed with a slow, careless demeanor, for while they may get hot and heavy, they knew that they were not having today. Instead, they contented themselves for feeling the skin of the other and exploring the mouth and teeth with their tongues that swirled inside, retreating to get what little air they could before beginning again. Naruto furrowed his eyes after a while, thinking about the agreement Sakura had coerced him into last week. Why would she ask for something like this? But he would ask her, because she was a forward girl, with a little bit of pushing required. Backing out of the kiss, Naruto had to push Sakura's shoulders back, as the poor girl tried to continue the passionate lip lock. When she couldn't find it, she opened her eyes and edged her head, waiting on him. Sakura, why'd you ask for this date with as you said, no? Naruto saw Sakura's mouth gap open for a second before she shrugged helplessly and tried to initiate another kiss. Sakura, it's nothing. Sakura, come on. Sakura sighed as she leaned back and sighed even louder. I just wanted you to see me as more mature, alright? I'm not the rebel I was in high school. I'm an upstanding lady now. Mature. Naruto thought as he gazed at this girl. No woman. Her S had grown in nicely, her hips nice and wide. She had a stable job now, and was smart as a whip. Yes, she had matured, but Naruto's mind grinned perversely as well. An upstanding lady with a fine. Naruto replied huskily as he heavily circled his hands around and groped at her, and she smiled back with a blush and a dirty smile. Look at you, you little minx, Naruto grinned back at her, talking about being ladylike in your underwear and outside in a public park. You're still a rebel, Sakura. I fell so hard for that part of you. Sakura's heart did their flips as her body heated up at his ministrations, making her shiver with glee and leaned further into him. I can't change everything I am. I just meant, I don't steal cars anymore. Naruto simmered at that fact of cars. I egged you on. I helped you too. Sakura bit her lip to hold in her regret. You did, but I wanted to see the awe in your eyes as I did those kinds of things. And some of those things caused this to stop. The time for talking was over as Sakura pressed into him again and kissed him, but Naruto only kissed back somewhat as he felt that this kiss was different. Sakura was fierce, forward, and confident. This kiss was needy, still fierce and forward, but he sensed sadness. Naruto pulled back after a time and graced her cheek with his hand as she eagerly leaned into it, and Naruto frowned. Was there an underlying meaning to today? To see her as more mature. To see her in a new light. Sakura was perfect the way she was in his eyes already. Sakura, you okay? Sakura reopened her eyes and rubbed at the light trail of tears that had formed. Maybe I'm not. Sorry. Sakura giggled sadly. I guess I'm emotional today. Naruto smiled at her. That's probably it, he thought blindly. It was her time of the month to be emotional, right? She was on the pill and everything, but emotions still ran high. Yeah, no hidden agenda. I can see that. Naruto finished, before they were bathed in a golden glow and looked out past the tree to see the sun out, poking at them with a nice warmth. Sakura moved away to see if her dress was dry, and upon reaching for it, she slid it back on, turning to watch Naruto slide on his jacket. That was a close one, having to tell him why she wanted a day without. More mature Sakura bit her lip smiling. Her feelings hadn't changed at all. She still wanted to ride him for all he was worth, and yet the feeling of just being beside him was perfectly fine too. Yep, she was in deep. She didn't want this to end. Today was a day for new things. As she spotted Naruto texting on his phone, she couldn't help but see his parents in that same pose years ago and quirked her eyes at a sudden thought. Hey Naruto, Sakura called over, turning his head towards her with the tip of her finger gliding along his cheek. You want to be a rebel, for a few more hours? And do what? Sakura smiled like a daring cougar. Your parents never let me into the family warehouse. As the two drove over to Naruto's business, the sun was fully shining and the day was bright and full of possibilities. Inside the car, however, Naruto did all he could to keep his eyes and mind on the road, but that was hard when he had a lady's hand lovingly stroking his thigh. Naruto breathed slowly out of his mouth, his throat constricting as the car made a right turn, and held in a hiss as Sakura's delicate fingers squeezed the muscles to hold fast onto him. Oh God! Did she realize that she could cause a crash right now? She was crazy. But maybe she had planned to hold his hand and was too scared to pull it back in, Naruto thought before turning his head to look at the woman. Her eyes gazing outside the window, a soft smile on her face, unconscious of his staring eyes. No, if she wanted to hold his hand, then she'd have done that. Sakura was perfectly content with her hand right where it was. Inside Naruto's head, he'd been struggling all day. Like damn, this day was hard. He had agreed too quickly on no today. Naruto had seen heaven, he had been tempted, and he had been denied. Earlier in the park, Sakura had looked like an angel in her sundress when he met up with her. The sun had been shining as they frolicked away, giggling and running everywhere with no real plan. It was so much like a movie that Naruto, looking back on it now, couldn't fully believe it. And when that shower hit, they raced for the tree, the cold downpour surging into their clothes. Naruto had taken his eyes off her for 1 second, and as he spun back, he was awarded with Sakura pulling off a skin-tight sundress from her lithe frame. She had turned and demanded his jacket, and Naruto took that as a sign. They were going to out in the open under the cover of the rain. But when she laid her head down on his shoulder a few minutes later, he was rejected. But that's how this turned into something more. When she fell asleep, it settled him and his arousal. He could do this. A day without. But damn it. He cursed as he looked down, madly wild. If she raised her fingers by an inch, he'd stop this car and her brain out. A few minutes later, they reached his warehouse's turn-off and he pulled in. Naruto may or may not have seen the impressed look on Sakura's face when he parked in his own personal space up front, and he may or may not have gloated about it just a bit. Sakura was impressed, but she didn't need her lover getting a swell head or anything. She began to reach for the door when Naruto raced out of the car and made his way to her side before opening the door for her. Sakura coyly smiled. How kind of you. Just making a good impression. Sakura accepted the offer and followed him to the front door, which he also held open. It appears that you can hold open many doors, kind sir. I try. Naruto shrugged as both walked into the front area, where Jamie looked up and gasped. Sakura held in a smile as the young girl tried to fix her hair before standing up and gathering some documents into her hands. Mr. Namikaze. I didn't think you were in. Afternoon. Jamie. I'm just showing my childhood friend around the place. The girl gazed back at Sakura and she saw the way Jamie looked her over before biting her lip nervously, sizing her up. She quickly turned back to the task at hand. I have your files prepared for the next week, and the contracts still need to be signed. Wonderful, Jamie. I don't know what I could do to repay you. Sakura smiled as the college girl hid a blush while playing with a strand of hair. You've done plenty, sir. Well, make sure that you leave early enough for class. I heard that the freeway had an accident by your exit. Thank you. I will. Jamie called out as Naruto continued his tour. She seems nice. Sakura commented as Naruto nodded along. She's as smart as a whip, and always organizes my schedule. Every time I think I'm done, she reminds me of what I need to do. And what does lightning kunai do, exactly? Sakura flirtatiously asked as they entered the warehouse, but she gasped as she saw the golden circle and black kunai everywhere she looked. Oh my god. You graffitied everything. I did not. You so did. Sakura giggled. You tagged everything with that symbol in high school. My parents loved that symbol I drew. They renamed the company for that. Naruto blushed as he saw Sakura's smile only continue to widen. Anyways, the company handles shipping for small businesses that can't have a dedicated person or prefers to let us handle the regulations and paperwork. Quite a few trucks you have lined up. Sakura pointed out at the 10 bay doors. Business has been alright. You repair the trucks too. Sakura spoke up as they turned the corner, where some employees were welding. Well, it's better than waiting in line for another company to come in, though we have begun to repair other companies' trucks too. Sounds like you have many facets to your company. Naruto shrugged. I suppose. I just noticed how much experience my guys had, and they were tired of driving, so I asked them if they'd be willing, and well, now the top guys are like lead bosses and such. I couldn't do anything without them. Of course. Sakura nodded happily along, hearing the humility in his voice. Tell me more. An hour later, Naruto sighed relieved as he smiled back at her. And that's about it. That's a huge amount, Naruto. Sakura praised, rubbing his arm affectionately, causing Naruto to blush happily. You do an amazing job, at work, and in other things. Sakura whispered seductively as Naruto gulped. Hey boss. Got a minute? Another employee walked up and Naruto excused himself again. Sakura watched him talk a few feet away and smiled. That Jamie girl had obviously admired him, and all these interruptions from his employees expressed respect and admiration. Sakura felt like she was showing her claim to Naruto around here, with a touch on his neck, the closeness she got, pretty clingy things to do, and things she'd done throughout all of high school. Sakura shook her head of the thought. This wasn't high school. This was the place where his parents has forbidden him from taking her, saying that no teenager should be walking through a workplace with dangerous equipment, despite the fact that he was here every day to help. No. Sakura overheard Naruto smile and shake his head. Quote. No. You already did that. I did. Oh, thanks, boss. I thought I was going to have to stay late to get it done. No problem, Jerry. Enjoy your kid's birthday party. She's turning 16, right? Yes, sir. Plenty of young teen girls who are going to keep me up all night with their screaming. They plan to watch horror movies all night. Naruto smiled and walked back to her. Shall I show you my office? Lead the way, sir. Sakura mocked as he smiled and led her up to the catwalk that from above you could see into every section of the warehouse. Sakura noted that she'd walked through many warehouses as an officer, but this one definitely showed some happy workers. And here is my office. Naruto exaggerated by throwing his arms out, and Sakura held in a chortle at the simplicity of it. 4 computers on 3 desks, a few filing cabinets, and a private bathroom and stairwell off to the side. Sakura looked behind Naruto's desk and smiled at the fixed window. That window had brought them together in a way. She was thankful for that window. Hey, sorry about all those people interrupting. Oh, hush, Naruto. Sakura cut him off, cooing as she stroked his face between her hands as she kissed his lips for good measure. They absolutely adore you. It's just because I'm their old boss's son. Naruto tried to look away, but Sakura pulled back towards her and shook her head. They don't, Naruto. I'm sure that you've done some amazing things here. Maybe. Naruto shrugged as he sat down at his desk. Sakura smiled as she leaned against the edge of the desk, looking down at him as she caught him staring at her against the hardwood, and kicked him playfully. My eyes are up here, baka. Naruto stuttered, making Sakura giggle at his expense. When he looked up at her though, a wave of realization hit her. She hadn't been with him for all of this. Naruto gave her a confused smile when she rubbed his arm, and she voiced it aloud. We never really talked about this yet. Tell me if I pushed too far, but what happened after I left? Your parents, all of this. Naruto smiled sourly. Well, when I realized you weren't at school the next day, I went to your house. No one was home. Eventually, your parents said that you were far away and they refused to tell me anything. I was depressed. I mean, there I was, after being with you, and then it was like I had nothing. Sakura's eyes teemed with tears, but she nodded for him to continue. I guess I just learned to live with it. My parents were getting sick constantly. I started helping them out as a job for the remainder of high school. I got in for a year of college before they passed. Naruto nodded. Quote. I wanted to be beside them. I had planned to forget the whole thing, but they insisted I